So reading from Deuteronomy chapter 19. When the Lord your God has destroyed the nations whose land he is giving you, and when you have driven them out and settled in their towns and houses, then set aside for yourselves 3 cities centrally located in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Build roads to them and divide into 3 parts the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, so that anyone who kills a man may flee there. This is the rule concerning the man who kills another and flees there to save his life. One who kills his neighbour unintentionally, without malice or forethought. For instance, a man may go into the forest with his neighbour to cut wood. As he swings his axe to fell a tree, the head may fly off and hit his neighbour and kill him. That man may flee to one of these cities and save his life. Otherwise, the avenger of blood might pursue him in a rage, overtake him if the distance is too great, and kill him, even though he is not deserving of death, since he did it to his neighbour without malice or forethought. This is why I command you to set aside for yourselves 3 cities. The Lord your God enlarges your territory as he promised on oath to your forefathers, and gives you the whole land he promised them, because you carefully follow all these laws I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to walk always in his ways. Then you are to set aside 3 more cities. Do this so that innocent blood will not be shed in your land, which the Lord your God is giving you as your inheritance, so that you will not be guilty of bloodshed. But if a man hates his neighbour and lies in wait for him, assaults and kills him, and then flees to one of these cities, the elders of his town shall send for him, bring him back from the city, and hand him over to the avenger of blood to die. Show him no pity. You must purge from Israel the guilt of shedding innocent blood, so that it may go well with you. Do not move your neighbour's boundary stone set up by your predecessors in the inheritance you receive in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess. One witness is not enough to convict a man accused of any crime or offence he may have committed. A matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If a malicious witness takes the stand to accuse a man of a crime, the 2 men involved in the dispute must stand in the presence of the Lord before the priests and the judges who are in office at the time. The judge must make a thorough investigation, and if the witness proves to be a liar, giving false testimony against his brother, then do to him as he intended to do to his brother. You must purge the evil from among you. The rest of the people will hear of this and be afraid, and never again will such an evil thing be done among you. Show no pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. I suppose at first glance we might wonder, what does this say to us in 21st century Britain today? Well, it has a lot to say to us. Notice, 6 times in today's reading, Moses reminds the people they are going to live in the land the Lord is giving them. It's what he'd always planned to give them. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 8, verse 10, verse 14. That by divine providence they are entering what was his plan and gift. And how are they to respond? Well, this chapter deals with integrity, or protect the innocent. And just a word at the beginning, it's dealing with the state, or I suppose for us, the church, not individual response. That's especially important when we come to verse 21. So verses 1 to 10 are talking about making provision for the vulnerable. It deals with the situation where someone has committed what we would call involuntary manslaughter, a death caused by negligence or accident. God tells them to set up 3 cities for the accused to run to. And these cities must be accessible, verse 2, attainable, verse 3, and assured, verse 5. Why does God want this provision made? Because he wants people protected from undeserved penalty, verses 4 to 7. You see, the Bible is actually very practical and down to earth. It's making provision for the vulnerable to seek justice. You know, a society should have grievance procedures for those who may find it difficult to have their voice heard. And if we take a look at verses 9 and 10, we see that the weak and the innocent suffer if society has not made provision for their safety. And we read that the whole of society shares in the guilt of the harm done. So if our society mistreats the vulnerable or the poor, all of us share in that guilt. That should prompt a question for us for today. What are the needs of the weak today? Who are the vulnerable? And are they treated justly? And if not, then Christians should be prepared to do something about it. And quite often we may see something, but we delay in taking actions, maybe because of practical or economic reasons. But let's remember that God is not happy when the vulnerable are treated unfairly. I suppose it's what we might call today the asylum principle, to give safety or shelter or protection to those who are vulnerable, to people who feel exposed to danger. And how does that affect how we view our government's asylum policy and taking in immigrants? We're to have a heart for those who feel that the law won't give them a fair hearing. And perhaps that's a call to set up or to support advocacy groups within our churches for the vulnerable. But then, of course, again, the Bible's very honest and practical. Verses 11 to 13, there will be those who abuse it. There will be false asylum seekers. There will be those who, in this case, have committed premeditated murder. And for them, the penalty is death. And until they're executed, the whole community, again, is to bear the guilt, because the shedding of blood, innocent blood, is abhorrent in God's eyes, because when his blood is shed in sacrifice to make atonement. It can't be an innocent person's blood. It's a waste. So the message, a Christian society must protect the innocent and punish the guilty. Now almost a similar principle gets played out in verse 14. This is about the unscrupulous annexing of land, and it has a lot to do with tampering with the Lord's allocation. Listen to this from Joshua 14. Now there are the areas the Israelites received as an inheritance in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel allotted to them. Their inheritances were assigned by lot to the 9.5 tribes, as the Lord had commanded through Moses. Moses had granted the 2.5 tribes their inheritance east of the Jordan, but had not granted the Levites an inheritance among the rest. For Joseph's descendants had become 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. The Levites received no share of the land, but only towns to live in, with pasture lands for their flocks and herds. So the Israelites divided the land just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Or remember Naboth back in 1 Kings chapter 21, when the king wants his vineyard. Verse 3, but Naboth replied, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my ancestors. And that's really a great illustration of what Moses may have had in mind here, because it's usually the strong
who annex land from the weak. So again, protect the vulnerable. You see, God hates it when the powerful abuse the property of the weak. Hosea chapter 5. Judah's leaders are like those who move boundary stones. I will pour out my wrath on them like a flood of water. Read the whole story of Naboth in 1 Kings chapter 21. Or listen to this from Proverbs chapter 3 verses 10 and 11. Do not move an ancient boundary stone or encroach on the fields of the fatherless, the orphans. For their defender is strong. That's defender with a capital D, means God. He will take up their case against you. You see, God is concerned about how we manage property. Christian principles apply to how we manage property in our society. Just think for a moment of those stories you read in the Daily Mail about hedge disputes, or moving fences into someone's garden, or access rights on drives. Guilty of doing any of those things? Well, God hates it when property is taken by the powerful from the weak and the vulnerable. And then from verse 15 we come to safeguards for victims. First one is there's to be more than one witness. Why? Because verse 16, one witness may be malicious. Secondly, a judge must investigate. Notice that the priest and judge are acting on behalf of God. Verse 17, it's a theme picked up again by the Apostle Paul in Romans 13. Also implies that the judge and priest's investigation isn't to be hurried. Verse 18. Of course, taking time over an investigation, frustrating though it may seem, helps us to think reflectively over the situation, doesn't it? And then if the witness is false, look at the punishment they're to receive. Verse 19. The same punishment that they hoped the person they were accusing was to receive. So for instance, if someone accuses someone else of murder in the hope that they will receive the death penalty, but the accuser is to be found false, then they are to receive that penalty. False witness, lying to get someone else into trouble, is abhorrent to God. Now, why is God so severe on all of this? Why do we read time and time again about the death penalty? Well, read verse 19. It's so that evil is purged. This sort of thing ruins harmonious fellowship. It makes the whole group, the whole church, society, nation unrighteous. It's also so that it can be a deterrent. Verse 20 discourages repetition. And that brings us to the famous verse, verse 21. Did you notice, verse 19, the punishment is not to be vindictive. And here, verse 21, is not about unbridled savagery. It's about the law of equality. If you like, the punishment for false witness must match the crime. It's about giving the maximum sentence, yes, but not over-punishing. Now, we may cite Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 and 39. But remember, there's a key difference between here and what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. Because Jesus is talking about personal relationships, not legal systems. So how are we to handle those who hurt us personally? Well, Paul in Romans 12 helps us. We're to bless those who hurt us. We're to leave God to repay. But here in Deuteronomy, It's about the law of the land, not personal revenge. It's, yes, necessary for wrong to be punished by society in order to maintain stability and justice in any country. So as I said, I think this actually has a lot to say to us in 21st century Britain. It's about being concerned that the vulnerable are protected, that the weak are offered sanctuary. How does that apply to our asylum policies, our attitudes towards illegal immigrants? Asylum seekers to be taken in, perhaps advocacy groups supported. Let me give you an example. I remember in a previous parish we were given a donation to hand over to an advocacy group for immigrants. We did. The press picked it up. But the abuse we received from church members was overwhelming. Is that the behaviour of a true follower of God in the light of what it says here in Deuteronomy? Land is not to be stolen from the weak. Not to steal land. Think of those disputes over a metre of garden or boundary wall. Should Christians be involved in them? That the state administers justice on God's behalf. False witness is to be punished. Lying to get someone else into trouble is abhorrent. But punishment isn't to be vindictive. So I think Deuteronomy chapter 19 does apply to us today. And it's reminding us that it's the job of all of us who call ourselves Christians, who love the Lord God and desire to follow him and serve him, to get involved. Perhaps to join or support a local advocacy group. Or maybe it's about joining a political party. But God calls on us all to protect the weak and vulnerable today, just as much as those thousands of years ago in Israel.